After the gruesome Second World War, Germany was divided between the two superpowers. But in this timeline, Germany has survived, thrived, and became the leader of the democratic world. This timeline diverged from ours when Austria united with Germany in 1919, eliminating the rise of the far right and preserving democracy. The French and Italians banded together in an attempt to weaken Germany, while the British supported Germany to protect the status quo. As war broke out between the Latin Axis and the Saxon allies, with clever tactics and technological advances, the Germans would manage to develop the first nuclear bomb, destroying Stalingrad and eliminating communism in Europe. After defeating the Soviet Union and repelling an American invasion of the British Isles, the Americans had signed a peace with the Germans. The hopes of the Germans and the Americans is that this peace would be the stepping stone to a normalization of relations and recovery to avoid the spread of communism to their countries. But the American election in 1948 would give rise to the fascist sympathiser, Charles Linbergh, to leadership of the USA in 1949, fumbling the torch of liberty and leaving Germany to inherit the flame. Will Germany rise to the challenge and unite the democratic world? Or will nationalism divide them? Will the Germans manage to modernize their nation with the power of the atom? Or will their victory give rise to arrogance and exceptionalism? All of these questions and more will be answered in episode 1 of Project Talons, Project Stresa Season 2. Before we study this timeline, there's a very important element that we need to discuss. Exactly how this Cold War would even function. Even with the inauguration of a fascist sympathiser in America, the superpower's governmental structures, economic systems, and roots in Western civilization would not give this Cold War the same character as our timeline. However, it would only take one action to split the Western world apart for decades. The Treaty of Berne was the peace treaty that was signed between America and Germany in order to attempt to normalize the relations. The stipulations of this treaty had specified that after a new constitution was penned in France, democracy was restored in the Kingdom of Italy, and suitable concessions had been made to Germany to avoid another world war, the French and Italian nations would be united again. This, combined with the United Nations, would ensure that Germany and America would never need to fight again, instead settling their disputes diplomatically. These overtures by Dewey's America had fostered a sense of goodwill and gave many hope for the future. However, all the effort that both sides had undertaken to establish a permanent peace would end once Linbergh was inaugurated president. In order to fulfill his campaign promise of not compromising on American economic and national security, Linbergh would revoke America's signature from the Treaty of Berne and demanded the immediate repayment of the Dawes Plan loans, repudiating the promises that his presidential predecessor had guaranteed. After the glorified satellite states of Iberia, the French state, and the Kingdom of Italy had all also withdrawn their signatures, the capitalist world was split in half overnight. Such a radical change of policy from the Americans had sent ripples through the economies and political realities of the Saxon allies. The previously occupational governments in northern France and Italy were forced to become their own independent governments. These German-backed governments would have varying levels of stability. Given northern France's occupation of the capital of France, Paris, would give them significant legitimacy, while northern Italy's geographical resemblance to the former territories of the Austrian Empire would forever stain their government's legitimacy in the eyes of their citizens. In order to ensure the economic stability of their new puppet states, Germany would announce their ambitions to unite Europe under a federation of nations, a European Union. By doing so, they would ensure that their puppet states did not have to create independent economies in their war-ravaged countries. Instead, the European community would work together, ensuring the economic prosperity of all the Saxon allies. However, there would be many who would reject Germany's directive and secede from the Saxon allies altogether. Fearing German dominance over their economies and therefore their independence, Czechoslovakia, the Intermarium, and the Romanians would all withdraw from the Saxon allies, despite their encirclement by the Germans and their satellite states of Hungary and Russia. With the Saxon allies losing 3 major nations, a new alliance would need to be formed. The remaining Saxon allied nations would band together to form the Association of Democratic Nations, also known as the ADN, with their primary members being Britain and Germany. But would Germany be able to rise to the challenge of becoming the leader of the free world? How has the Second World War shaped the culture and the politics of the state? After World War I, Germany was meant to have been cut down to size, unable to rise again. This humiliation had given rise to the National Socialists. Their rapid militarization and brutal warpath had scarred Europe, forever synonymizing German nationalism with destruction and hatred. But in this timeline, the rhetoric of the fascists was dispelled, with Wilson's 14 points at least attempting to be resolved by allowing Germany and Austria to unify in this timeline. The turbulent Weimar period had ultimately culminated in a victory for democracy. After the brilliant operations of Charles, Margaret, and Bayern, the Germans were once again consolidated under one government, and despite the continuing war, Danzig and Memeland were once again brought into the Prussian state, further reversing the humiliation of the past. Since the development of the nuke and the Americans' anxiety of establishing a quick peace, Germany was able to effectively take leadership of the Saxon allies by forcing Britain to abandon their hopes of restoring their empire, begrudgingly accepting the Edwardian government's existence, along with their Japanese alliance in exchange for peace. A decision which would fuel an increasingly large British resentment, but would remain dormant for now, as the conservative movement desperately seeks to rebrand following their participation in a pro-Edwardian coup. As Germany had undergone the trials of the Second World War, the Democratic coalition had remained, but their nationalism had grown stronger than ever before. Despite France and Italy's attempts to destroy their state, they were able to modernize, subjugate them, and reach unprecedented technological advances, becoming the arbiter of a new era. This victory and ascendant position, despite their underdog status, would instill a German exceptionalism that would permeate in the zeitgeist of the Germans domestically and in minority regions across Eastern Europe. This would culminate in the foundation of the Volksbund system, where Germany would organize regional Germans to pressure local governments for autonomy and to comply with German national interests. While under the guise of ensuring minority rights of Germans across the world, in practice, Germany would use these organizations to gain an unprecedented amount of influence in foreign nations. By collaborating with the Russian Liberation Army, the Germans were able to destroy Bolshevism in Europe and push the communistic frontier further beyond the initially anticipated Urals. Through the charisma of Andrei Vlasov, the Petrograd regime would be stable, but heavily dominated by German interests. And as there would be a notable German minority in the Volga, the Germans would naturally establish a Volksbund there, but the scale of German interference in Russian politics would make this Volksbund a far different beast than the others. In our history, the Soviet Union had forcibly relocated roughly 1 million Germans from their European territories to other locations far from the front line. This is because of their justifiable concern of these Germans collaborating with the Nazis in their invasion. While in this timeline, Germany was not an ethno-nationalist state that sought to colonize Eastern Europe, the Soviets would still see these Germans as a liability and would therefore proceed with the forced relocations. By the time that Germany would have occupied these regions, only few Germans would remain, with the rest being deported to either Kazakhstan or Siberia. The German Republic would be appalled as they discovered the sheer scale of the Soviet deportations and would strictly enforce a policy of returning these Germans back to their homes. Thus, the Eastern Repatriation Initiative would be undertaken with the goal of bringing all formerly deported Germans back to their homes in Russia. As the recently formed Turkestan Federation was amicable with Germany and wanted to avoid the imposition of a Volksbund, they would collaborate with the Germans to ethically and gradually return the exiled Germans back to their homes on the Volga. But as this process would continue, the noose would slowly tighten upon the Russians. The returning Germans in the Volga would act as if they were a constituent state in the German Republic, not a Russian citizen. Despite the German Republic's stated objectives to reintegrate them into Russia proper, this would only strengthen the Volksbund of Russia to a level far beyond its peers in the Baltic. Further to this end, the Germans would impose ideas such as Normanism onto the Russians through their educational programs. Normanism is a real-life theory regarding Russian history, suggesting that Russia as a nation was founded by the Varangians rather than the Slavs on their own. By forcing Russia to adopt this historical narrative, future generations of Russians would begin to see themselves as an extension of the European identity, rather than admiring their state as a Eurasian phenomenon, which is only achieved by the grit of their ancestors. The ERI, Volksbund and their educational initiatives would be deeply opposed by Vlasov, but would be quietly tolerated as they would secretly discuss a third partition of Poland. With the Intermarium leaving the Saxon allies and refusal of establishing a Volksbund, the stability of their state would rapidly decrease. Their insistence of refusing German influence, despite claiming to strive for a harmonious multiculturalism between the Polish, Lithuanians, and Ukrainians, would trigger immense skepticism across the Intermarium, one that Germany was quick to exploit, eager to support these separatists in hopes to gain new collaborators afterwards. While Russia and Germany would both eagerly anticipate the opportunity to attack, they both would be suffering the economic shockwaves of the Treaty of Bern's repudiation. If Germany were to have any hope of supporting Russia's reconstruction, they would need to balance their own budgets, which were rapidly decreasing. While the reacquisition of their colonial territories through the transfer of the League of Nations mandate leadership had ensured industrial development, the cost of maintaining these colonies was far too much for Germany and even Britain to handle. So while Germany was unshackled from its obligation to abandon their claims to the British Empire, even the most loyal Georgian had understood that the age of colonization had come to an end, and the age of neo-colonialism was on the horizon. But how successful would the ADN be in their decolonization efforts? How would exiled governments like Portugal react to their benefactors, essentially demanding that they all give up their lands peacefully? All of these questions and more will be answered in episode 2 of Project Talons, as the South African War begins and Cato rises.